So I wanted to open with a kind of footnote to what we discussed at the end of last week's class. We were talking about the sanctity of the Beit Knesset, which is the central topic of the first half of Megillah chapter 3, and comparing it to the sanctity of the Beit Mikdash. And okay, so if we look in the language of the Mishnah in Mishnah 3, chapter 3, Mishnah 3, okay, the Mishnah says there, talking about a Beit Knesset that was destroyed. Okay, so there are several things that one can't do. Okay, notice there is a residual sanctity in the ruins of a Beit Knesset, and among the things that one can't do at the very end of the list is ein osin oto kapandaria. Okay, kapandaria means a shortcut. Okay, if let's say if it's you want to get from one street to another, and the Beit Knesset straddles both streets, you can't walk through the Beit Knesset in order to have a shortcut. And this actually is the clearest connection before we get to the pasuk Vashimotit Mikteshechem, which we talked about last week. This is the clearest parallel by halacha that's related to the temple. Okay, there's a Mishnah at the very end of Tractate Brachot. Lo yikanetz lahar habayit b'maklo u'v'minalo u'v'fundato u'v'avak shal raglav. Okay, when you enter Har Habayit, you can't take with you a walking staff. You can't wear shoes. You shouldn't take a pouch. Okay, and you should make sure that your feet aren't dusty. That's, of course, assuming that you're not wearing shoes, right? Which was forbidden. Today, those people who do go up to Har Habayit make sure to wear Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av shoes, which are permitted. Okay, and they also make sure not to take a pouch. Okay, which is also forbidden on Har Habayit. Okay, and the part that's relevant to us is Lo Ya'asenu Kapandaria. Okay, you can't use the Temple Mount, okay, as a shortcut from one place to another. Okay, now I was interested in this parallel not only because it underscores the point that the sanctity of a Beit Knesset is patterned on the sanctity of the Temple Mount, but because of the last line of the Mishnah in Brachot, which leads to a very interesting discussion in the Talmud. Okay, the last line in Tractate Brachot is Urekika mikal v'chomer. Okay, you shouldn't spit on Har Habayit. Okay, so now there's a discussion in the Talmud Bavli at the end of Brachot. Does this apply to a Beit Knesset as well? Okay, and Rava says, Amar Rava Rekika b'Beit HaKnesset Sharia Miri dahava min al. Okay, it is permissible to spit in a Beit Knesset the same way that it's permissible to wear shoes in a Beit Knesset, right? We never heard a halacha that when you enter a Beit Knesset, you have to take off your shoes the way you're supposed to when you enter the Temple Mount. Okay? Because ma min al bar habayit asur b'Beit HaKnesset mutar. Okay? The same way that shoes are asur on the Temple Mount and mutar in a Beit Knesset, Afrikika bar habayit hu asur b'Beit HaKnesset shari. Okay, and then the Talmud wonders whether this is really a good argument, and after a somewhat protracted discussion of this topic, Rava comes back with another argument as to why spitting in a Beit Knesset should be permitted. By the way, we should note that when you're talking about spitting in a Beit Knesset, talking about most structures at the time didn't have tiled floors. Okay, it didn't have wooden floors or tiled floors. You'd have dirt floors. So when you spit on the ground, it will get absorbed there. Okay, so Rava says at the end of the discussion, ki veito, a beit knesset is like a person's home. Ma beito akapandarya kapir inish arakikao minala kapir inish. Just as in a person's house, he will object to people using his house as a shortcut, but he will not object to people wearing shoes in his house or spitting on the floor in his house. Af beit knesset kapandar Yehuda asur kikao minal shari. So too, a beit knesset we will forbid using it as a shortcut. That's what we saw in the Mishnah. But we will not forbid spitting on the floor or wearing shoes in a beit knesset. And now, this passage in the Gemara was analyzed, I think, in a very astute way by Rabbi Soloveitchik in one of his essays. This was one of his Yortzeit Drashot, okay, which turned into an essay. Many of these were essays that were published during Rabbi Soloveitchik's lifetime. And Rabbi Soloveitchik tries to analyze what is the difference between a Beit Knesset and the temple. Okay, and he uses this image that Rava talks about of the Beit Knesset being like a person's home. Rabbi Soloveitchik argues the following. There's both a Beit Knesset and the temple are places where you encounter the Shekhinah, you encounter the presence of God. But you encounter the presence of God in two very different modes, in a Beit Knesset or on the temple or on the Temple Mount. Okay, on the Temple Mount is not like a person's home. Rather, it's the home of Ribono Shel Olam himself. And when a person comes to our Rabbi, then he has to feel that he is a guest in the home of Ribono Shel Olam. He's in the home of the divine, in the divine abode. A Beit Knesset, on the other hand, is like a person's house, and if you encounter God in a Beit Knesset, it's like God entering your own home. Okay, so there is a difference between how a person will behave in his own home and how a person will behave in someone else's home. In your own home, even if you have a very distinguished guest, in this case, the most distinguished guest one can imagine, God himself, okay, nevertheless, it's still your home, and you treat it as your home. So you're not going to take off your shoes just because you have a distinguished guest. And, again, contemporary manners might not approve of this, but at least in the manners that were the etiquette that was practiced at the time of the Talmud, you wouldn't necessarily refrain from spitting on the ground, even in the presence of a distinguished guest, because this, after all, is your own home. In your own home, there's a certain freedom, okay, as opposed to when you go up onto the Temple Mount, then you're not in your own home. Then you are a guest in the home of the divine. And that requires a much higher standard of etiquette than what you would have in the Beit Knesset. So, to my mind, this is a very interesting and very instructive summary of how we can analyze the way in which the sanctity of a Beit Knesset is patterned on the sanctity of the temple. On the one hand, you do have a connection. Okay, in both cases, you're meeting the divine. But going up the Temple Mount to meet the divine in his abode is a very different experience from summoning the divine to enter your own abode. Okay, when you summon the divine to enter your own abode, it doesn't take you as much out of your own routine. It doesn't take you as much out of your own normal daily experience. Okay, and so you encounter God within your daily experience, as opposed to going up to the Temple Mount, okay, which is a way of taking you out of your normal routine, out of your normal daily experience, and encountering God in a very, very different mode. Okay, so I just wanted to use that as a concluding point to last week's class. Okay, any comments or questions on that before we move on? Okay, so let's move on to the second half of chapter 3. Okay, the second half of chapter 3, as we noted already in last week's class, deals with the reading of the Torah. And there are actually two different kinds of Torah readings that are listed in these Mishnayot. Okay, the normal Torah reading that we do in the course of the year is mentioned in these Mishnayot. But interestingly, it's listed only as a sort of incidental or almost as an afterthought. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of places in these Mishnayot where we refer to the normal reading of the Torah. Okay, anyone want to call our attention to where the Mishnah notes the usual Torah reading that takes place every week?
Well, they are interrupted by the special readings for Rosh Chodesh and the special Shabbatot.
Right. Okay. So that's in Mishnah 4. Mishnah 4, we talk about how. Okay. Mishnah 4 addresses the special Torah readings, but notes how the special Torah readings interrupt the usual ones, the routine Torah readings. That's one place. And where else?
6.
Right.
The last one.
At the end of Mishnah 6. Right. At the end of Mishnah 6, after listing all of the special readings on the different festivals, the Mishnah says, B'sheni u'b'chamishi b'shabbat, b'mincha korin kisidran, ve'no ole lahem min ha'cheshbon. Okay, that we on Mondays and Thursdays and Shabbat afternoons for mincha, okay, we read the Torah, and that is not included in the cheshbon. Okay, what does the Mishnah mean by cheshbon? Okay, cheshbon means a reckoning. What are we reckoning?
We're reconciling the special readings with the regular readings?
That was true in Mishnah 4, but here we're not talking about that reconciliation. The reckoning here is very simply the cycle of completing the Torah reading, right? In other words, every Shabbat we read a portion, and then the following Shabbat we pick up in the next portion, okay? And the following Shabbat we continue, okay? And how long does it take us to complete the Torah reading?
Now, we...
Yes,
takes us a year.
Okay, it takes us 1 year, right? And on Simchat Torah, we have a big celebration when we conclude the reading and signal the opening of the following year's reading. Okay, but the minhag in Eretz Israel was to complete the reading once every
3 1/3 or something. It's a little over 3 years.
Okay, good. Yeah, most people will say 3 years. Okay, but actually we have sources available which give us lists of what was read in Eretz Israel every week. There's something like 140 portions, and the average in Eretz Israel was every 3.5 years. Okay, now, when I say the average, there's a scholar, Shlomo Naeh, who theorizes that actually not all communities read the exact same portion every week, and a lot depended on when there would be leap years and wouldn't be leap years, and other kinds of variables, so that the point would be that some communities might finish in a little under 3.5 years, some communities might finish in a little more than 3.5 years, but what all communities would aim for would be, okay, and this is related to why 3.5 years. Where would 3.5 come from?
Right? Hakel.
Why not 3 or 4? What?
So Hakel would be every the seventh year.
That's right. Okay, so that's what all communities would aim for. Okay, in other words, if your first 3.5 year cycle was a little shorter or a little longer, you'd make sure to make the correction the next cycle, so that all of you could, we're about, Am Yisrael is about to celebrate the Siyum Hashas, right? That's also about 7 years, right, to finish the Daf Yomi cycle. Okay, so you want everyone finishing at the same time. So you want all communities finishing their second cycle of Torah readings, okay, on Sukkot of the 7th year, okay, or actually Sukkot right after the 7th year, the 8th year, okay, so that Hakel will be a grand finale for the double cycle of Torah readings that all communities are completing. That's the cheshbon that we're referring to. Either the 1 year cycle in Bavel that we follow today, or the 7 year double cycle that was followed in Eretz Yisrael. And what the Mishnah is telling us is that the readings on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat Mincha are not part of that reckoning. Namely, what do we read on Sunday, on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat for Mincha?
Right, we just repeat.
We read excuse me?
We just repeat. Yeah.
That's right. We read the first section of next Shabbat's Torah reading, okay, and we repeat it. Okay, you do it on Monday, you do it again on Thursday, you do it, and then Shabbat Mincha, you start the following week's cycle, which you repeat again on Monday and Thursday. That is not included in the cheshbon. So, the first Mishnah and the last Mishnah sort of mention almost in passing that there is a regular Torah reading and the regular Torah reading, the regular Torah reading has this quality of getting all of Am Yisrael to finish reading the Torah on a regular basis, once every 3 years or once every 3.5 years. Okay, everyone in Am Yisrael will have concluded a complete cycle of Torah reading. That's what we call the cheshbon. Okay, but in addition to the cheshbon, there seems to be another idea present here. Why do we read on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat Mincha if they're not included in the reckoning? So what's the point of that reading if it's not included in the reckoning?
Isn't that based on the idea of not going for 3 days without reading from the Torah?
Right. Okay. So there is a midrash that tells us that's how these days were selected. Can we, translate that into an idea or a value?
Well, when we looked at the first chapter, we spoke about measuring time in relation to Shabbat and divide, right? 3 days reading. I don't know.
There's not going 3 days without what?
Without Talmud Torah.
without some kind of Torah, without some, I would call that, in a sense, contact with the Torah. Okay, so there's one idea of making sure that the entire Torah is open to us, right? That we're all familiar with the contents of the Torah. To be familiar with the contents of the Torah, we have to read it, read the whole thing on a regular basis, and then repeat it, and then repeat it again. Okay, so that we're looking here for something comprehensive. I would call this more of a kind of knowledge base. Okay, Torah becomes a knowledge base, or even in a sense, it becomes a language. Okay, when you repeat the Torah, and go through the whole thing on that kind of regular basis, so you familiarize yourself with it. You know its contents, okay, and it becomes a kind of second nature, okay, a kind of common language that all Jews can speak. And I think, to this very day, one of the things that unites religious Jews is Parshat HaShavua. Okay, you meet one another. You have an immediate Torah topic that binds you. You all know what the Parshat HaShavua is, and you can all discuss it. And this is something that's familiar with us and creates a common language. But since the Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat afternoon readings, okay, they're not part of this comprehensive reading. Just the point of to touch base. Okay, it's like you have person will maintain contact with a parent, right? A grown-up will maintain contact with a parent. Okay, so part of the contact is you get together, you sit down, you spend time together. That's when you have a real conversation. Okay, but then you call on a regular basis. Okay, once every week, once every few days, once every day. Okay, that's just a brief hello conversation, and it's not really to exchange information. Okay, it's really about maintaining contact. Okay, so I think the regular Torah reading has both of these ideas. I'd say it's the constant contact with Torah, and it's this comprehensive attitude. All of Torah has to be open to us. We have to be familiar with it. We have to internalize it, make it into a common language. Okay, so these are the two ideas of the regular Torah reading. Okay, but again, I find it very interesting that in the Mishnah, these are not the main ideas that are being emphasized. The main idea that the Mishnah is emphasizing is something else, namely
the readings that are not part of the regular reading.
Okay, and what are those readings about?
Well, they all are connected to Passover.
Okay, certainly some of them are connected to Passover. Some of them are connected to other events or other times, right? So
They're connected to the calendar.
Yeah, the Torah becomes a kind of a calendar. Okay, but again, there's the weekly calendar, the routine calendar that takes you from one week to the next, and you progress as you go along. That was the cheshbon reading that we talked about before. But what kind of calendar are we talking about here?
Well, it's a calendar of the significant points throughout the year.
Right. So what is the Torah reading doing for that?
Well, the fourth Mishnah is about the maftir readings. I found this a little bit confusing until I focused on it and realized the fourth, when it looks like it's all the same, but the fourth is about the special maftir readings, the four before Pesach. And then the sixth is actually about the Torah reading itself, not about any special readings.
Okay, that's the way we observe things today. If that's what the Mishnah is talking about or not, we'll investigate that a bit further on. Okay, whether that indeed is the case. That's certainly the way we tend to understand the Mishnah in light of our own practice. But whether that's what the Mishnah intended, we'll see in a bit. Okay, but generally speaking, Mishnah 4 and 5 and most of Mishnah 6, okay, are talking about Torah readings for special occasions, for special events throughout the calendar. And it seems somehow that the Torah reading is an important way of connecting with or relating to or expressing the meaning of that day. Okay, so we'll explore that a little further as we go along. There's a very different idea, right? You have the routine Torah reading, the cheshbon, that maintains contact and is meant to, to enhance our knowledge base and create a common language. And then you have the special readings for the special days, and these are designed to express, each one expresses something about the particular day on which it's read. This is the mode in which we give expression to how we understand that day or how we celebrate that day. Okay, now just one additional point before we move on to our next level. What happens when there's a conflict between these two? What happens when there's a conflict between the regular reading and the special reading? What happens?
The regular reading is suspended.
Good. That's what the end of Mishnah Daled seems to say, right? Lakol mafsikim, or in some versions, bakol mafsikim, Rashei chodashim, b'chanukah, b'purim, b'taniyot, u'v'mamadot, u'v'yom kippurim. We suspend the regular readings. Now, this gets into the question that, this gets into the question that Sherry raised before. Okay, let's take a look at the two discussions of the Bavli and the Yerushalmi surrounding this Mishnah. Okay, the Bavli says, okay, actually on a different line of the Mishnah, B'chamishit chozrim l'sidran. So the Bavli says, l'seder mai. What do you mean you return to the normal order? Rabbi Avie amar l'seder parashiotu chozer. You return to the regular parsha, the weekly parsha, which indicates that what happened during the 4 Shabbatot that we didn't, that we read the special readings, what happened to the regular parsha? Got shunted aside. It was suspended. We didn't read it. That's the way Rabbi Avie reads it. Rabbi Yirmiyah amar l'seder haftarotu chozer. You return to the regular haftarah reading, because the normal haftarah reading is related to the parsha. But on the special Shabbatot, you don't suspend the regular reading, but you do suspend the regular haftarah. Okay, and for us that would also mean you also read a special maftir, right? Haftarah is the portion from the Nevi'im, and the maftir is the 8th aliyah, after the standard 7 aliyot. So you have an additional, okay, the person who will read the haftarah, okay, is also given an aliyah. At the time of the Mishnah, it would seem that there was no special maftir. In other words, the maftir would just read from the portion from the prophets. You wouldn't get a special Torah reading beforehand. Okay, and so it would just mean you read a special haftarah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah's practice is our current practice. That's why Sherry assumed that that's what the Mishnah meant. But the simple reading of the Mishnah fits in better with Rabbi Avie. you return to the normal order. You return to the normal order of a Torah reading. And in fact, in the Yerushalmi, okay, we have this stated explicitly. Okay, Sha'al the Rav Yirmiyah, Rosh Chodesh shechal liot b'Shabbat b'ma korin. What happens when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat? What do you read? Alei korin b'Rosh Chodesh. Okay, you just read the Rosh Chodesh reading. You don't bother reading the normal portion that you would read on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Chelbo kume Rabbi Ime, Batnita Amarakein. So Rabbi Chelbo said, you know what? That's exactly what I understand the Mishnah to be saying. Lakol mafsikim, Roshei Chodashim lachanukah l'Purim. Okay, you interrupt the normal reading for all of these special days. Okay, and so in Eretz Yisrael, it seems that was the only reading that they had of the Mishnah, but the Bavli presents two readings, okay, one of which became normative for us, but the other one actually seems to be the simple reading of the Mishnah. Okay, so I think that in the Mishnah, the answer to my question, what happens when there's a conflict, is not, as we do today, you compromise. You maintain the normal reading, but then you have a special haftarah. Okay, the simple reading of the Mishnah seems to be that when there's a conflict between the routine reading and the special reading, you set aside the routine and you just hold on to the special reading. And that fits in with the whole tenor of these three Mishnayot, which really emphasizes the role of Torah reading as a way of expressing the uniqueness and the character of special days during the calendar. The role of Torah as something routine, as something that we maintain contact with constantly and try to develop as a knowledge base and common language, that's also important. It's there, okay? It accompanies us, but in a way, for the Mishnah, it seems less significant. It's a less important feature of Torah reading than the other one, which gives expression to the special sanctity of the day. Okay, now having said all that, now we get to what I think is, the big question mark hovering over these Mishnayot. Let me formulate the question as follows. Okay, let's to lead into the question. Let's look and see how these Mishnayot are ordered. Mishnah 4 talks about 4 special readings that occur when?
From Rosh Chodesh Adar through Nisan, just before Pesach.
Right. Okay, these are Chodesh Adar special readings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll look at them in greater detail in a bit. And then Mishnah 5 starts listing the festivals, starting with Pesach, moving on to Atzeret, which is Mishnah's term for Shavuot, moving from there to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Chag, which is the Mishnah's way of referring to Sukkot, okay? And then in Mishnah 8, Chanukah, Purim, and finally Rosh Chodesh, okay? And then, a few other days that are scattered throughout the year, okay? But, okay, we've gone through the calendar, starting with Adar in Mishnah 4, moving on to the festivals in 5, and concluding with the rabbinic festivals in 6, and then a host of other days that aren't, don't have a particular date in the calendar, but can be spread out throughout the year. Rosh Chodesh, Ma'amadot, Taniyot, and so on. Okay, now, if you had to list the special readings in order, where do you think you would start? Okay, let's free yourself from the Mishnah. put yourself into the shoes of the Mishnah redactor, and imagine you have freedom to arrange all of these special readings however you like. How would you start?
Well, typically the starting place is Pesach. You wouldn't start with Adar.
Excellent.
Shalosh Regalim or something like that.
Excellent. Okay, and just to illustrate that point, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, tractate actually with our tractate Megillah, but we won't go into that. Okay, Rosh Hashanah has 4 opening Mishnayot which list calendar dates for different purposes. So first you have Arba'a Rashi Shanim, okay? There are 4 New Years, which if Bezrat Hashem, we should be not together and we'll talk about how a year can have 4 beginnings, okay? But how are they listed? The first one is Echad B'Nisan, then we move on to Echad B'Elul and Echad B'Tishrei, and then either Echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat. Those are the 4. Okay, you start off with Nisan. Then the next Mishnah tells us about 4 different dates of judgment, when God judges the world. Okay, and the first one is Pesach, and then Shavuot, and then Rosh Hashanah, and then Sukkot. The next Mishnah, 6 months for which the messengers go out in order to inform the public. Inform the public that when the new moon was sanctified, and again Al Nisan mipnei Pesach, and then Av because of the Ta'anit Tisha B'Av. Okay, then Elul because of Rosh Hashanah, and then Rosh Hashanah because of Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and so on. Again, you start with Nisan, and finally, 2 months for which witnesses will violate the Shabbat in order to travel to the court and testify about the new moon. Al Nisan Al Tishrei. Okay, it's consistent. You start with Nisan/Pesach and move on from there. And here, before we get to Pesach, Mishnah 5 does exactly that. We start with Pesach. Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and then Chanukah and Purim, okay, which are following right along in the calendar. And interestingly, after Yom Kippur, the only festivals are rabbinic. Another point to discuss, but not for now. So we're following the normal calendar order. And Purim, closes the cycle. You start with Pesach, you conclude with Purim, you have your whole cycle. Okay, in Mishnah Daled, so Mishnah Daled is strangely placed for 2 reasons. First of all, since when does the calendar start in Adar? Calendar will start in Nisan, usually, sometimes in Tishrei, for, as we've seen in Massekhet Rosh Hashanah, usually in Nisan. Why start enumerating the year from Adar? And secondly, these special readings, do they occur on festivals? They're a festival? What occasions these special readings?
They're bookended by Rosh Chodesh Adar and Rosh Chodesh Nisan, aren't they?
Excuse me, I didn't catch what you were saying, Elizabeth.
Aren't they bookended by Rosh Chodesh Adar and Rosh Chodesh Nisan?
Yeah, the Mishnah presents it in a very interesting fashion as ranging from Rosh Chodesh Adar to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But is Rosh Chodesh what really occasions these readings? We don't read a Rosh Chodesh reading either at the beginning or at the end, right?
Right.
The usual Rosh Chodesh reading is the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, right? Is of Rashi Chodshechem from Parashat Pinchas. These are different readings.
Yes.
that aren't that closely affiliated with Rosh Chodesh per se. What occasions these readings? What occasions them actually is not a festival that is occurring on that day, but some event that is about to occur. These are future-looking readings, and we'll look at that in detail in a bit. Okay, but before getting to that, okay, one further point about the structure of this Mishnah. It's one of the study questions I asked you to think about. The Mishnah presents these four readings as though you're starting on Rosh Chodesh Adar and concluding on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And that works out if and only if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, which is not the usual occurrence. May not be that rare, but it's not usual either, right? Usually Rosh Chodesh will fall sometime during the week. But the Mishnah starts off with, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, then you read Parshat Shkalim on that day. Okay, and then if it just so happens it doesn't fall out on Shabbat, so you move it up. Okay, you move it back to the previous Shabbat. But the default is to read it on Rosh Chodesh. You read Parshat Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar. Okay, and if you read Parshat Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar, the consequence will be you will also read Parashat HaChodesh on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because that's exactly 28 days later. Okay, Chodesh Adar is typically 29 days. Okay, Chodesh Adar is is not a 30-day month. Nisan, okay, on the Jewish calendar, that's universal in our Jewish calendar, and even the time of Chazal, that would be the standard calendar, that Adar would have 29 days. Elul, by the way, is similar. Elul always has 29 days. Okay, Rosh Hashanah is always going to be the first, the first day of Rosh Hashanah is the first of Tishrei, not the 30th of Elul. Okay, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan is never going to be the 30th of Adar. There is no 30th of Adar. It's going to be the Rosh Chodesh will be the 30th, but it won't be the 31st, right? So if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh Nisan will also fall on Shabbat. And the Mishnah presents that as a default. And it's also a very interesting formulation. Okay, you read on Rosh Chodesh Adar, you read Parshat Shkalim. And then the Mishnah says, Umafsikim l'Shabbat ha'acheret. You skip the next Shabbat. It sounds as though there was some kind of expectation that every single Shabbat in Adar would have a special reading. The Mishnah says, well, sorry to disappoint you. This one doesn't. But what about the others? All the others have. Okay? Then, Bashniya, you come to the 15th of Adar, and you're reading Parashat Zachor. You come to the 22nd of Adar, and you read Parashat Parah. And you come to the 29th of Adar, and you read Parashat HaChodesh, right? So you're, okay? So basically, you have pretty much filled up almost all of the month of Adar. Almost every Shabbat during Adar has a special reading. And all of these readings are not celebrating a festival that occurs on that day. They're all commemorating something else or referring to something else. Okay, so the placement of this Mishnah is strange, and the structure of the Mishnah is very intriguing. Somehow or other, there is something special about the month of Adar that invites all these unusual special readings. So now let's take a closer look at what they're all about. Why are we reading Parashat Shkalim on either Rosh Chodesh Adar or the Shabbat just before? What is Parshat Shkalim about? Sherry, let's unmute you.
Sorry.
Yes, okay. Unmute. Yeah, okay, now we can hear you.
Collecting a tax for communal necessities.
Okay, specifically which communal necessities?
Well, isn't that spelled out more in Shekalim, the first Mishnah that you asked us to look at?
That's right, indeed it is.
So that.
Okay, here's the Mishnah. Right. Bechad ba'adar mashmiin ala shkalim. And the shkalim, the main purpose of the shkalim was for the temple service. The communal sacrifices were purchased with these shkalim. Okay, now what you noted is that in the first Mishnah of shkalim, it also says that some of these funds would be used for other communal practices. But the main purpose was for purchasing the communal sacrifices. Okay, now why is this done on the first of Adar? So this depends on how the year is measured in the temple. Remember, we talked before about how there were 4 different New Years. Okay, so one of the New Years is the New Year for the temple, namely the first of Nisan is the New Year for the temple. The temple year begins in Nisan. Okay, and if you want to have all the communal funds in place in the Mikdash so that you can use them for purchasing communal sacrifices, you want to have them in place by the beginning of Nisan, so what do you have to do? Bechad Badar mashmi'in ala shkalim. We announce, okay? We have a korban fund drive, okay? The Gabbai gets up in or the president of the shul gets up in shul on Shabbat and he announces, listen guys, it's time to bring in your pledges. Your half shkalim have to come in, okay, within the next couple of weeks so that we can send them off to the temple and they'll be in the temple by the 1st of Nisan. And that's why, if you look at Mishnah Gimel, the 15 bo shulchanot ayu yoshvin b'mdina. Okay, on the 15th of the month, they used to set up, here it says tables, but we would call it like booths. It set up collecting booths. Okay, and in fact, the Mishnah continues and says that the collectors weren't necessarily sitting and waiting for people to show up. If people didn't show up, they went after them and said, it's time to hand in your half shekels, right? That was on the 15th. So you announce it on the 1st and you read the Torah at the same time, okay? That's part of the announcement. Okay, it's not just the Gabbai who gets up and announces it, the Baal Korah announces it too. Okay, by reading that special Torah reading, which informs the people, okay, it's time to get in your pledges. Okay, so according to this, the Torah reading, the special Torah reading at the beginning of Adar, really has nothing to do with the month of Adar per se. What does it have to do with?
It has to do with Nisan.
The month of Nisan, preparing us for the month of Nisan. We open the month of Adar by saying, oh, guess what? We have to start preparing for Nisan, okay? Time to start on Pesach cleaning. I know my wife doesn't wait till then for Pesach cleaning, but that's essentially what we're saying, right? Pesach is around the corner. Let's get in our half shekels on time. Okay? Interestingly, there's a midrash that does say that Parshat Shkalim has something to do with Purim. Okay? Well-known midrash. Okay, I brought one version of it from the Yerushalmi. Okay, Tzafa Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shaman HaRasha Atid Lishkol Kaspo Al Yisrael, Amar Mutav, Sheyikdom Kaspan Shel Banai, V'Chaspo Shel Oto HaRasha, Tichach Makdimin V'Korin Parashat Shkalim. Okay, remember, how did Haman convince Achashverosh to exterminate the Jews? He gave Shkalim, right? He gave Shkalim in order to persuade Achashverosh, and so God has prepared already Makdim Trufa L'Makah. He says Israel will give in their Shkalim before Haman gives his, and that way our Shkalim will trump his Shkalim and prevent this this terrible event. Okay, so there is a midrash that relates the reading of Shkalim to Purim itself, okay? But the main reason does seem to be to actually prepare for Nisan, okay? Then if we move on, Parashat Zachor is related to
Purim also, why?
to Purim, right? Because Haman was a descendant of Agag, was a descendant of Amalek. He was the king of Amalek, the one that Shaul failed to kill, right? So, okay, so that's certainly related to Purim. What about Parashat Parah? Why are we reading Parashat Parah right after Purim?
Well, the purification in preparation for Pesach.
Okay, that's preparing for Pesach. Parashat HaChodesh,
Pesach.
preparing for Pesach. Most of the readings in Adar have to do with preparing for Nisan and not with anything special about the month of Adar. Only one of the readings of the month of Adar, maybe two, maybe Shkalim, have to do with an event that occurs during the month of Adar. Okay, and maybe this will be our clue as to why the Mishnah opens the calendar discussion with the special readings of the month of Adar. Okay, and this will relate us back to an important point about Purim and the month of Adar that we saw in chapter 1. Yes, Elizabeth.
Doesn't this bring us back to why we read the Megillah on Adar Bet and not Adar Aleph? The same reasoning.
That's right. Okay, what we see is the month of Adar here again, as we encountered it in the first chapter. The month of Adar, the importance of the month of Adar and the importance of the festival of Purim is to prepare us for the real redemption of Pesach. Okay, Purim is a way of preparing us for the Beit HaMikdash. And even, let's come back and look at this midrash about how the Shkalim are related to Purim. Our Shkalim will overcome Haman's Shkalim. What's that in fact saying? When Israel prepares themselves for the temple service, that's what ultimately will undermine Haman's evil scheme. Okay? In other words, Purim is really a celebration of something very partial and something whose real meaning lies in the future. Okay? It lies in Nisan, it lies in Pesach, it lies in the Shkalim that will be used for the temple service. And so really, okay, if the real calendar starts in Mishnah 5, Mishnah 4 is a way of preparing us for that real calendar. Our Torah readings during the month of Adar tell us, A, we're celebrating something in the month of Adar. We read Parashat Zachor, okay, to give us the Torah basis for what we're celebrating in the month of Adar. But the real meaning of the month of Adar is how it prepares us for the month of Nisan. And the real meaning of the Torah readings within this month of Adar that more or less fill up the Shabbatot of the month of Adar. The meaning of those Torah readings is to prepare us for the special Torah readings on the festivals. And interestingly, the Torah readings of the month of Adar are on Shabbatot. They're not on the festivals. Because that's the nature of the month of Adar. The nature of the month of Adar is to interrupt the routine weekly readings in order to prepare us for the festival cycle that's about to start in Mishnah 5. Okay, I'd like to conclude tonight's shiur with two points, okay, that I'll try to make briefly, and they're interrelated. Okay, the chapter ends with a proof text. Shenemar vaydaber Moshe et Modei Adonai el bnei Yisrael mitzvatan shiyu korin kol echad ve'echad bizmano. So, this proof text summarizes which of the two kinds of readings, the routine readings that we read every week, or the special readings that we read on festivals.
I'd say this, when I read it at home, I thought it was the regular readings, but now I think it's the special festivals.
Yes, I think your second approach is correct.
In part because this reading comes from the festival reading on the festivals.
That's right. We're talking about Moadei Hashem. This verse appears at the end of the listing of all of the festivals in Vayikra chapter 23, right? Moshe spoke these special festivals, and what do we learn from that? Moshe spoke them, and so we echo Moshe's speech. Okay, Moshe, on the festivals, this is how the Mishnah seems to be presenting it. For every festival, Moshe got up and gave a drasha, and he said, let me explain to you what this festival is all about. That's Vaydaber Moshe et Modei Hashem el bnei Yisrael. And then, what do? We echo him. On every festival, we get up and we don't explain the festival, we read the Torah reading about that festival. Now, interestingly, if we look in the Tosefta, you can see that other sources than the Mishnah actually learn something else from this verse. Shoalin hilchot ha-Pesach ba-Pesach, hilchot ha-Tzeret ba-Tzeret, hilchot ha-Chag ba-Chag. You're supposed to study the laws of Pesach on Pesach. And you're supposed to ask your teachers to teach you the laws of Pesach on Pesach. And the Bavli makes it clear that this was taught by Moshe. Moshe tikein lahem l'Yisrael. Moshe instituted this. How do we know Moshe instituted it? From our verse. So there's a verse that actually says that what we're supposed to do on the festival is have the rabbi get up and give a drasha. The drasha on Pesach should be about Pesach. The drasha on Shavuot should be about Shavuot. But the Mishnah says, no, we're not talking about Torah Sheba'al Peh teachings that are related to the laws. We're talking about Torah Shebichtav. You read the Torah. Reading the Torah is what gives expression to the meaning, of that day. Okay, now, why is the reading of the Torah related to the day so important? What in effect is the Mishnah telling us about the Torah reading? When you read the Torah on the festival, in relation to the festival, what does that accomplish? What does that do?
Is that like Zechirah? Like you're really sanctifying the holiday that way?
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay? This is a point, by the way, made very strongly by Rabbi Soloveitchik, and the comparison to Kiddush is very apt. Rabbi Soloveitchik always stressed that when we recite Kiddush on Shabbat, we are not only acknowledging the sanctity of Shabbat, we are sanctifying the Shabbat. Shabbat was sanctified by God during the 7 days of creation, right, on the seventh day of creation. But even though the Shabbat has been sanctified by God from the very inception of the world, we are required to add our own level of sanctity to that baseline sanctity that Shabbat has. And that's how Rabbi Soloveitchik understands the recitation of Kiddush. And the Mishnah at the end of our chapter, I think, is presenting a very similar perspective on the festivals. How do we sanctify the festivals? We sanctify the festivals by reading the Torah. Okay, now let me ask you what historical time frame you think this might reflect. When would it be appropriate to say that the way to sanctify the festival is to read the appropriate Torah reading associated with that festival? Well, let me ask it differently. Can you think of a historical time frame when, if you were to ask a person, what is the most potent expression of the sanctity of this festival, you would give a very different answer. You wouldn't say a Torah reading.
Yeah.
In the time of the
Excuse
temple.
me?
Yeah. It would be temple sacrifices during the temple.
That's right. Okay, at the time the temple was standing, the main expression of the sanctity of any festival would be the Musaf offerings and sometimes additional offerings, like on Yom Kippur, there'd be all other offerings as well, right? The temple service would be the main way of expressing the sanctity of a festival. This Mishnah is very much an outgrowth of a situation in which there is no temple. And if there is no temple, then the question is, how do you express the sanctity of a festival? And the answer is?
Torah reading.
By reading the Torah. Reading the Torah is what brings the community together and confers sanctity upon the day. Not just recognizing the sanctity. We're expressing the sanctity, and in a sense, we're even creating the sanctity of the day by having this special reading. Okay? And this leads us to the final point with which I want to conclude for today, which is how the two parts of our chapter fit together. The first part of the chapter talked about the sanctity of a place, okay, a synagogue. The second part of the chapter talks about how we sanctify the festivals by reading the Torah. What brings these two ideas together?
At the holy space of the temple.
Okay, so you've got the holy space and the holy time that are being integrated. That's correct. But there's something else that I think is very crucial in understanding their interconnection. What's the focal point of a synagogue?
Torah. Right, the Torah and the Aron.
That's right. The Torah in the Aron is the focal point of the synagogue. The first part of this chapter tells us how the sacred space of any community focuses on where the Torah is being housed. You have a synagogue, and at the center point of the synagogue you have the place where the Torah is housed. And the second part of the chapter tells you, on those sacred occasions when the Jewish people have to come together and celebrate together, okay, and sanctify time together, how do they do it?
Just take out the Torah, read from the Torah, yeah.
They take that Torah out of the ark and read it. Okay, so the sacred time and the sacred space are both brought together by the Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah that serves as the focal point of the sacred space is also the most potent expression of the sacred time. Okay, we'll conclude with that idea for tonight. Thank you all,
Thank you.
and I hope to see you all next week.
Thanks so much.
Okay.